Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Donna and the committee for giving me this opportunity to speak about some work I'm involved in, which is part of my PhD, and I'm now entering my third year, which is a very interesting learning experience on top of a full-time clinical educational job in England. So it's a really good opportunity. So this came about, this is my title, The Lived Experiences of Women with Rectal Emptying Difficulty, Practice Influencing Theory. I have a disclosure to make, which is the Medical Devices Technology and Innovation, and these are a commercial partner to the National Health Service in the UK, and they are involved in the patient-centred device that has been invented as part and parcel of this work. So this image demonstrates the type of women that I may see in my clinic, and those of us here today will also see this type of situation. But what I've learned and what I knew, but actually it's grounding my understanding, is that women keep this hidden and secret. And it's the coming into healthcare maybe with several years of experience, devastating experience, suffering in silence of not being able to empty their rectum. Some women have said to me that it's like giving birth. They take 2 hours maybe to have a normal bowel motion that you and I may do within a couple of minutes. And they have found themselves engaging in ways to manage it without any healthcare involvement. And it was through this consistent approach that I found in my practice that enabled me to say, I think it's time we did something about it. And the literature was very slack on this area. What it talks about is when the woman's got the problem about going on to surgery, but nothing around that experience leading up to that time. And therefore it actually made me want to inquire further. So the background here, we can just see some simple anatomy, and you can see that this is all related in the particular piece of work that I'm doing on rectocele, which is the posterior compartment herniating or prolapsing into the vaginal vault. It's common. 40% of women over 50 years may be living with prolapse in the community, and some of them will not know they have one. Women may digitally position the anatomy to line the rectum for passing stool. And what's interesting is that it's now been defined better, and some of the anal rectal dysfunction papers come out, certainly by Sultan, has really given some highlight to the definitions. So it's called digitation, where you use your fingers, or splinting, or applying pressure. So there may be 3 variations, but interesting, the literature says that there is no correlation between any one of those practices and being able to get a better output. So women may choose to use their fingers, they may choose to use their vaginal vault to do this, the perineum to do this, or actually buttock pressure. So it's really interesting. And 56% of women from the literature that I was able to find have a rectocele, and they do need to use digitation. And what's really interesting, we don't ask about it. We don't ask women about it. And women will probably disclose it for some of them, but often if they're not asked, they won't say. And that's certainly what some of the women have been telling me. So it's a quote that is not unsurprising, as I always need to know where the toilet is. Using my fingers has not been effective, and I feel as if I'm trying to give birth. It makes people dizzy. It can lead to soiling, abdominal pain, of course, psychological impact, and so on. So in my journey, it's like, well, what are the questions I want to ask? What is it I want to do to try and reveal the problem? So because I sort of did this around the, not necessarily the wrong way, but a very interesting way, was develop the patient-centered device first. So I developed that, and the question in phase 1 is, does that make a difference? Does that work more effectively and satisfactorily than their usual methods. And their usual methods may be using their fingers in their vagina, their fingers in their anus, or perineal pressure, or pressure on their buttocks. But of course, what we need to do is understand what's the lived experience of the women living with obstructed defecation, purely because they have this herniation in their rectum. And that's the bit we know very little about. There's very few studies on it. If there are studies on digitation, it's part and parcel of the workup to surgery. So that's phase 2. So in terms of the direction of travel of my work, it started with some exploratory work, which was really very small, only 10 examples of self-selected women who chose to use the patient-centered device to give feedback voluntarily and confidentially. So I didn't know who they were. Phase 1 will be understanding whether the device itself makes a difference to those women against their usual care. And phase 2 is, let's hear their story. Let's sit down and do an in-depth interview and hear their story and see if I can theme that and what are the consistent descriptions that are coming up, with the aim to change practice, so that when women go to secondary care or primary care, that we have a better idea of what we should be asking people, so that we can prevent women taking up to 30 years to get help. So the exploratory work was very simple. These 10 self-selected cases identified a mechanical problem, physical effects, and psychological issues. So it was really emerging very clearly, and the strength of it is that it was voluntarily provided, and we didn't solicit it at all. And 6 out of 10 of those women preferred using the device to their usual care and found it very effective. But of course, that's just gives me a taste of, it's got potential, so let's delve a little bit deeper. So those key concepts are around struggling to empty a rectum, leading to self-initiation of digitation or splinting, experiencing the problem's mechanical, physical, and psychological issues, which could be anxiety, overuse of laxatives, abdominal bloating, constipation, changes to social networks, and also intimate relationships, and some really quite startling descriptions that they give themselves in terms of their self-esteem and their autonomy. But as I'm doing a doctorate of philosophy, it's understanding the underpinning theories of this. And I'm still on my journey to understand the theories behind this, because I'm starting from scratch in some areas. So there's one issue around implementing evidence. So I'm using some theory based on the Paris framework, developed by Alison Kitson in the UK. Also coping frameworks, goes back to avoiding and approaching cognitive appraisal and coping back to the 80s. Some very interesting work. But what I want to know is, does Bourdieu's his philosophical theory around habitus? This is not about body habitus. This is about self-knowledge. How are these women who have never approached healthcare knowing to do digitation? How does one orientate themselves to do it? And it's really interesting that self-knowledge is actually changing people's behavior, but actually no one's taught. And yet the common consistency is that lots of women digitate, but they don't find out. No one tells them how to do that. So this natural instinct is really interesting. Then I've been thinking from some of the in-depth work is childhood experiences of toileting. And so the social learning theory, so I'm going to be using that as well. And a lot of the women I've been working with have said that they never talked about stool or poos or bowel actions when they were children. It was kept very secret. And therefore, that role modelling may affect their uptake of healthcare as they become into adulthood and actually have these issues. So this is just a project overview, and I'm going to be doing a mixed method approach, and it's a question of how I mix those methods, And that at the moment I haven't decided, and it might be I take a thread from both elements of the qualitative and the quantitative and follow the thread through. But I'm not quite sure yet. I really want to develop that thinking. So the quantitative is the use of the patient-centered device before and after, using questionnaires that are validated over a period of 8 weeks. And I've had 26 women do that so far out of 34. And the qualitative is those same women within 4 weeks of finishing using the device, and of course they can keep it if they find it really good. And a lot of women said, please don't take it away from me, I want to use it. Is then understanding their story. So I allow up to an hour, but it's really surprising of how some women are finding it difficult to even use words to describe their experience. One woman said to me that she feels disgusting, and she has to clean up. And I said, well, when you're cleaned up, how do you feel? She said, I still feel disgusting. So there's a lot of these factors that are colouring people's lives negatively. And I've included patient and public involvement or as a focus group, and that was illuminating to me. Really good learning to realise that I assumed what I thought I knew, but when I heard their stories, it's like, wow, it's really important that I don't assume what I think from clinical practice. So a lot of women will normalise, access to help is poor, emotions are high, it's a hidden problem, keep it secret very well, and they would love to have increased awareness. So the summary is, this mixed methods approach is looking at the lived experiences of women with rectal emptying difficulty. The proof of concept in the exploratory phase is helping me with phase 1, which I've already developed the patient-centered device, and moving through focus group and PPI into phase 2. And I think it will be a continuing journey. And eventually this work may lead to a randomized controlled trial. So my learning so far is that don't make assumptions. Recruitment is challenging, as many researchers know. So recruitment has been very difficult. Questionnaires are not easy to complete. And using the device, I'm now going to be developing an animation because some women have even difficulty using that. Because if you don't use digitation and then you have to put something in your vagina, it's a very challenging concept for some women who are not necessarily very au fait with their anatomy. So part of my work in the doctorate is defending my theory choice and making sure that I get the mixed methods approach sophisticated. So key messages. The poor attention to psychology of lived experiences really needs to be untapped. And using the clinical practice, I see a lot of men, women, children in my clinics, but it's provided me with a lens to be able to unravel some of these issues. And I feel very privileged to be able to work with the women who have come forward and disclosed their stories. So therefore we need to have a critical inquiry of problems. Take it further from an idea, allow it to germinate and grow. And also, I needed to be tenacious and brave with this because it was too easy to say it doesn't really need to be done. So that's really important. So I recommend to everyone for all your ideas to be able to take them forward. So thank you very much.